Welcome back to another episode of What's Up, Prof. Hello, Walter.
Hi, Martin.
I haven't asked for a long time how you are, so how are you?
I'm still doing okay, thank you.
That's good. What are we talking about today?
Well, today we're going to talk about medical missionary work in the time of crisis, but it has many connotations. And we're living in these interesting times where we don't know what cause and what effect is, and where the lines are so blurred that people become confused, angry, and there are so many divisions that are taking place, in my opinion, purposefully, that we have to be grounded in the Word of God in order to be able to rise above it.
Most important. So
Yes.
let's ask the blessing of the Lord. Our Heavenly Father, we need your blessing, please. We need your Spirit to enlighten our minds and help us in this discussion. We ask that now, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. And Martin, we have so much information and so many things are happening in the world that if we had to show everything, it would be an impossibility.
Yeah.
So what we will do is we will show little extracts of some things that are happening,
Yes.
and then people can look at it at their leisure and consider it a filtering system,
Yes.
that we had to go through it to see what it says, and well, you will understand that we have to look at hundreds of these and what is relevant and what is not relevant. And that is the big task, as to what is relevant and what is not relevant. And then, we receive in other languages as well.
Yes.
And some of this it's just mind-boggling.
My German is actually picking up a bit.
I send you some things in German every now and then, and you send me things, and people send us things. Thank you for everybody who is helping and trying to help. Just one more thing, Martin. Some of these pieces of information, they should actually go out into the world, right? And if you think of the Three Angels Messages series that Henry Stauber has made, it's not enough that is just on YouTube.
No.
Because this is evangelism, and the world needs to be informed. And perhaps we can just tell the viewers, please don't forget that we have a free download section where you can download these things.
Yes, our server.
We know that many people will say, well, we know about the Three Angels Messages, etc., but the world out there does not know.
No.
So download it. Don't leave it on YouTube. You don't know how long it's going to remain there.
No,
That's the
things are
problem.
changing at a rapid pace. And as we've mentioned in the previous WhatsApp, Prof, that there's a lot of changes coming from January in
Yes.
the social media realm.
Correct.
So
And we've installed, as we have said before, an entire server and an entire independent internet system just to deal with that, so that the message can go out. So download those messages that you think are relevant for people out there, so that you can hand them out on a stick or whatever, because soon it will not be possible to do these things anymore. Now is the time to strike while the iron is hot.
definitely. So let's have a look at some of these snippets.
Let's
And like you mentioned, just a reminder, I'll put the links to the full videos in our description of this video.
then you can look at them at your leisure. Let us just briefly have a look at how misleading the world is, and how everybody is purposefully being confused. Here is a tweet quoting the CDC directly. And it says here, myocarditis and pericarditis following mRNA COVID-19 vaccination. Evidence from multiple safety monitoring systems in multiple countries support the finding of an increased risk of myocarditis and myopericarditis following mRNA COVID-19 vaccination. That comes from them.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says underneath, this tweet is misleading.
Yeah.
So their own fact checkers say that they shouldn't have said that. So what should they have done? Keep quiet, right?
Yeah.
That's basically it. Keep quiet, don't talk about these things.
That's sad. This is just where we are at this stage in the time of history. Even if it comes from the highest source, somebody else can say, no, this is misleading,
Correct.
and they decide what is not misleading to you.
Yes. And then if you look at the new rules and what's happening in Austria and what's happening in Europe in general, and what's happening all over the world, what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Gibraltar, what's happening in Australia, these things have way gone past the realms of logic.
Oh, definitely.
There's no logic in it whatsoever anymore. One of the German leaders, apparently, a medical fraternity, said, for example, that unvaxxed people may do essential shopping, they may go to work, but as for the rest, they may go to a chemist for help, but as for the rest, they're not allowed to take part in society at all. But they're allowed to go to work. They're allowed to go shopping. They're allowed to do that. This is ridiculous. This is so illogical, it doesn't even make sense.
Exactly. The logic has walked out of the door quite a while back already.
This is not about logic.
No, it sounds actually a lot like the Second World War.
Correct. You may sit and eat, but you may not stand and eat. Now, those were military rules when we were in the military. Well, I was in the military. You escaped that demise.
I'm just in a war. I wasn't in the military.
My generation had to go to the military. And those were the rules. They were nonsensical rules. You dig a hole because A says so, and B tells you why you're digging a hole, close it again, and that is the kind of thing. It is to break down the morale and to break down any resistance so that when they build you up, eventually you are a robot. This is a form of mind control. And where is this leading? And why is it that people that question the narrative are immediately censored? Right, here's a short video which shows sports people suddenly just collapsing. And they're asking the question, why? Let's just have a look. Martin, this is just September, October, and parts of November.
Yes.
Now, never before have we had a situation like this. And some will argue it's as a consequence of COVID. And some will argue it's as a consequence of the inoculation. And some will argue, oh, nothing's changed, it's always been like that. It's never been like this. Anybody who has a thinking cap on will know that that is not the case.
Something is not right.
Something is not right. Now here's an article dealing with some of these issues from the 5th of November. Already 30 fates. Dramatic series of heart problems in top athletes. It's a terrifying series to watch right now. Young people in top shape and apparently very healthy are suddenly torn from life. Their hearts just stop. There have been more than 30 such fates in the past few months. The number of unreported cases is probably much higher. An urgent question is in the room. What is going on? I think that's all we have to read. What is going on? Now, even the official reporting systems like Veith, for example, they are reporting thousands of deaths and literally hundreds of thousands of adverse reactions. But this is just brushed aside. And then if we take into account that Veith only reports about 1% of the actual number, because the system is designed so as to prevent reporting, if I can say it like that.
And then what also is a problem is many times, and I know of some people, that they are now sick, but they don't pull it through to a reporting system, or they don't pull it through to maybe the vaccine.
Correct.
So they just think this is normal, that they should be sick.
Now, all of this data that we have, and it's never been like that in the history of humanity, is just being brushed aside.
Yeah.
And people that question the narrative are ostracized. Here's an article from the 22nd of November. Fauci, vague on changing definition of fully vaccinated. We might modify. The Center for Disease Control last week recommended that all adults aged 18 or older should receive a vaccine booster shot 6 months after the final shot of a completed vaccine regime. Fauci later said on ABC this week that he hopes the booster shot will not wane the same way the initial regimens did, which would allow Americans to avoid more regular booster shots at either 6 months or even a year. If it doesn't, and the data shows we need to do it more often, then we'll do it. But we want to make sure we get the population optimally protected, and you do whatever you need to do. Now, what's also interesting, Martin, is that even though some people are vaccinated, if they get sick, if they get COVID, as in the case of Israel now or Gibraltar, then they are regarded as unvaccinated.
Yeah, it's stunning.
It's amazing, right? And those that are vaccinated are blaming the unvaccinated for their demise, even in areas where 100% of the population is vaccinated. Yes. So who's responsible there, right? Just think about these issues.
No, that's why I said I think logic has walked out of the door about a year and a half ago.
There's no logic here. This is a different agenda. Now, Martin, this is a very interesting video. It's rather lengthy, so we won't show it all. It's between Tucker Carlson and Robert Kennedy. And it's a very, very interesting discussion because Robert Kennedy wrote a book on this issue, and they are discussing the book. Now, it's quite lengthy, but it's really worthwhile watching. Mm-hmm. And it's sometimes hard to listen to because we know that he has a speech problem. But once you get used to it, you will be able to absorb it. So we will include it and we'll put it in the links so that people can inform themselves as to what this discussion was all about.
So we just rewatched the entirety of this interview that we're about to play with Robert Kennedy Jr. And to be completely honest, the first couple of minutes, if you're not used to the way his voice sounds, you can think to yourself, well, I'm having trouble understanding this. Our strong advice to you is to keep listening. It is worth it. There's a lot in here, and you should hear all of it.
You know, why do people have this religious fervor when it comes to vaccine? Why can't I sit down with my friends, my liberal friends, and have a fact-based conversation? Why do I have to be silenced? Why do people consider me dangerous so that you're taking a huge risk by putting me on this show? You know, why can't we do what, you know, you're supposed to do in a democracy, which is to have, you know, ultimately to find common ground with people who disagree with you, to love your enemy, to have fact-based debates, and, you know, that are congenial and that are, you know, and that maybe can resolve and maybe not resolve issues. And instead, anybody who tries to talk about these things runs into something that looks like an old-style medieval religious orthodoxy, which is, you know, the repetition of these shibboleths: follow the science, protect granny, you know, stop being selfish, and but a total unwillingness to talk about facts, an imperviousness to factual argument, and not only that, but just a ferocious anger that you are dangerous because you have a different point of view than I do.
Well, Martin, that's just a snippet. Mm-hmm. The whole interview is very relevant to the time in which we live, and he has a lot of factual data.
You see, the problem is he's been under scrutiny for years.
Absolutely.
And they've been calling him a conspiracy theorist for probably 30 or 40 years. I will agree with what he said. Check the facts. Everybody is out there saying, but we rely on the science. Well, then you have to compare the science.
Yes, now they will say he's a lawyer, but on his team of researchers, there are a lot of very prominent medical men. And there is no doubt that there is a massive divide in society. But one group is being sidelined, is being demonized, and is being censored. Now, that tells you that something is seriously wrong in this whole scenario.
And like he mentioned, it seems like a medieval religious dictatorship almost.
Well, he's got it right, but he doesn't probably know exactly where it comes from. You know, Martin, it's gone to the point where they actually talk about the New World Order when it comes to the implementation of these things. And the independent, and there was also a video of the spokesperson for the Australian government using the word New World Order. Conspiracy theorists unite as Australian health chief uses the term at a press conference. Basically, get used to it. Mm-hmm. This is the New World Order. Now, I'm sure everybody is aware of where Dr. McCulloch stands. And what is interesting to me is the way in which they ostracize this top cardiologist, right? As though he is totally irrelevant in terms of the argument.
It is amazing if you take his credentials and what he's achieved. If I'm not mistaken, he's one of the most published authors of peer-reviewed articles.
Correct.
And if you try and Google his name, the first page of Google is fact-checking.
Now, what is interesting about what he is saying here is that he is realizing that there is something other than a medical issue at play here. And he doesn't know exactly what that something other is, but it is of such paramount importance and of such power that he cannot marry it into this what he is seeing. Now, if you do not have the religious aspect,
Yes.
then you will not be able to see it. But the fact that people are noticing it, even without the prophetic picture clearly stipulated and drawn for them, is amazing. So let's just look at a short portion of what he has to say.
If we don't act now, what people say is we are going to be like Australia. Australia has very little COVID. On most days, they have more COVID, they have more vaccine deaths than COVID deaths. There's something wrong going on in Australia big time. And South Africa is next in line. Europe is next in line. It's a very disturbing place right now. And they're at the point where they are at a breaking point. They have restricted their freedoms. It can't be about COVID at this stage. What's going on in Australia is not about COVID. It's about some type of mental contagion. It's about some type of psychosis, some type of neurosis, some type of totalitarian takeover that's occurred all over the world. Something very dark is going on. COVID is a platform, an event that's been planned, it's been organized. The vaccines were planned and organized in some way to effect some type of very, very large change occurring worldwide. But whatever's going on, the principles are lockstep. And what I mean by lockstep is that everybody is in lockstep. Meaning there's some guy on his knees in the Philippines, if he doesn't take the vaccine, he's not going to get his government check, and some kid is going to be on their knees in LA because he can't go to school if he doesn't take the vaccine. This same type of coercion and reprisal is going on worldwide. This book gives you the material transfer agreement between Moderna and the Chinese for the spike protein before COVID-19 was a problem. Okay? This was planned. This book has the Johns Hopkins Symposium. They planned the pandemic in 2017. They planned how they were going to get the scoreboard up on CNN. It's pretty obvious that there has been a suppression of treatment to promote fear, suffering, loneliness, isolation, hospitalization, and death in order to promote the vaccine.
Now, Martin, that's just a snippet of what he had to say, but I think it sums up more or less what he had to say. And Robert Kennedy basically said the same thing and proved it in his book that he wrote, and he calls a spade a spade. So people should really look at that.
And it's important what you mentioned earlier. They know something is wrong, but they don't have the biblical narrative to bring it all together.
And this is the burden that we have. And if people can't see that there's something wrong, if they buy into any particular narrative, then they are basically running the road of brainwashing.
It's important to know that what you've just said, because if you go and see, okay, now the problem is Bill Gates, or the problem is Fauci, or the problem is just certain people, you're missing the point. Like he said, this is much bigger, and that's what we've been saying for all along.
It's universal. Now, when we've spoken about these things in the past, we have consistently shown the Vatican connections, right? Mm-hmm. And we see these people talking to the papacy. We see them talking to Jesuit organizations, or they belong to Jesuit organizations, or they are trained by Jesuit organizations. Some of them might call themselves Catholic, some of them might call themselves evangelical, but they all have exactly the same source where they go to for their go-to information. Now here you have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the NIH held their third annual consultative workshop on April 18 at the Porter Neuroscience Research Center, on hand for the discussion of such global health issues as Zika virus, HIV, were Bill Gates, NIH Director Dr. Francis Collins, NIAID Director Dr. Anthony Fauci. So these people are the face of what is happening.
Yes.
But we're interested in what's behind the face, right? Why are they speaking in a coordinated voice? Why not only these medical directors? Why the media directors? Why the political directors? Why all of these are pulling the same strings?
Yes.
Let's just have a look at Francis Collins. Why does this take place? Pope names NIH head to Vatican Science Academy, geneticist Francis Collins. Pope Benedict has appointed Francis Collins, director of the National Institutes of Health, to the Vatican Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Are they tied in with the Vatican?
All of them are.
All of them.
I mean, we've shown that even Bill Gates is knighted.
Correct. And Collins, 59, is the geneticist who led the Human Genome Project. So who would be interested in all of these manifestations and manipulations? Here is another little video, Martin, of what's happening in Austria and how the society has suddenly been split into two groups. Mm-hmm. Those favored by the media and the government, and those that are in the dog box, ostracized.
It's like it's bells ringing, and it's like the Second World War, where certain groups were put into certain categories.
Correct. Let's just look at a brief extract of what happened there.
Hello and welcome to Unheard. I'm Freddie Sayers. I'm here in Vienna, the capital of Austria. You can see the Rathaus, the Parliament building, just behind me. And it's an apparently ordinary, quite gloomy November morning, except it's not actually an ordinary morning, because at midnight last night, a new law came into place, which said that anyone who is not vaccinated is not legally allowed to leave their home except for certain prescribed reasons. In other words, it is the world's first lockdown for the unvaccinated. I wanted to come here to find out, what does a society feel like where a third of the population has been kept at home in mandatory house arrest? What do the people who are walking around feel about that new reality? And perhaps most importantly, what does it feel like for those people stuck at home?
Now, this is quite a lengthy video. It's very informative and it's very well done because they address the legal aspect. They speak to the people on the street that are vaccinated, and they speak to the people that are unvaccinated. And it's interesting to me that people have become so callous and so hard that they have absolutely no regard or feeling for anyone who has a different point of view.
Exactly what Kennedy said as well.
Exactly. So some of these people on the street will blatantly say, whatever happens to those people, who cares?
They deserve it.
They deserve it, yes.
And right after that, he will ask them, okay, but you can still spread the disease and still have it. And then they're flabbergasted, then they don't have anything to say
They
again.
don't have any answer. So there are too many inconsistencies in this story. So why are we showing this, Martin? It's time that people started to think.
Yes.
That is what it's all about. I listened to a talk by a German physician who is retired now and who used to argue with his father, who was in the German military. And he used to say to him that they were at fault because they had the information before them in the time of the Nazi regime. Why did they not act according to their conscience? And he never forgave him for it. And now he says he can see why. Because propaganda brainwashes you to the point where you lose your perspective and you get to this position. Now, what is the aim of all of this propaganda? Here's another short snippet about what happened in Gibraltar. Now, why is Gibraltar interesting? Well, because it's 100% vaxxed.
Exactly.
And in fact, a very large proportion is triple vaxxed on that island. So what is happening there?
One place that's going to have a lousy Christmas is the most vaccinated place on earth.
Right. So, Rick, this is Gibraltar for, the total vaccination count is 100%. 100% of the population of the island of Gibraltar is vaccinated. And yet, they're having COVID cases, Rick.
Who's spreading it?
Well, it must be those unvaccinated that are there, right? But there are no unvaccinated. Everybody's vaccinated in Gibraltar. Quote from this article here, Rick, it said, amid a surge in COVID-19 cases, Gibraltar has canceled official Christmas events and strongly discouraged people from hosting private gatherings for 4 weeks. Gibraltar's entire eligible population is vaccinated. The government of Gibraltar recently announced that official Christmas parties, official receptions, and similar gatherings have been canceled and advised the public to avoid social events and parties for the next 4 weeks. Outdoor spaces are recommended over indoor ones. Touching and hugging is discouraged, and mask wearing is advised.
Based on the outbreak of COVID in Gibraltar, I would say everybody should get vaccinated.
So, Martin, that was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right? They should all be vaccinated, but they all are vaccinated, and many of them triple vaccinated. So, basically, the narrative as it is being spun in the world has lost all sense of logic.
Exactly.
There is no logic attached
at
to it
all.
whatsoever.
So that must tell you there's something bigger going on.
Correct. So let's put on our thinking caps. Now, our next little video is again quite a lengthy video, and we won't be showing it all, but we'll be putting the link in the descriptions. It's also one that one should watch. And why? Because it's cool, calm, collected, but asks some very pertinent questions. What is going on?
Is martial law what's coming next? And now we can see that many, many people are starting to rise against this madness. And it seems very encouraging, of course. They want these manifestations to get as big as they can. So that way, they can eventually call them riots and civil unrest. Please don't think blindly that this is finally the people taking power into their own hands, because it's not.
That was a very interesting statement. Now, they should look at the whole thing.
Exactly.
Right? Is this the people taking the power into their own hands? The answer is no, it is not.
No.
It is causing division. And you know, the Bible talks about that. Mm-hmm. That people will rise up against each other. There will be ethnic clashes. Now, Martin, if we think about planning, most people cannot even imagine that something could be so diabolical that you could actually plan something like this, right? But if you look at the logic behind it, then you can see that a lot of planning has gone into this. We've shown in past ones how they had simulated practice runs as to how they were going to respond to whatever was going to happen, right? Now, let's take the various divides that have occurred in just the last few years. Just the last few years. If you take American politics, with the election of Donald Trump and now the election of Joe Biden, never before has there been such a divide and so much hatred between two political ideologies as we have now.
Definitely. It's almost as if they can go to war.
It's almost civil war point, correct. And they hate each other with a passion. So we have political division to the point of passion. Then we have racial division, Black Lives Matter, to the point of passion. And they've had these lawsuits lately. And people driving through parades and killing people. And you have this terrible racial tension in the world. Then you have economic tensions.
Yes.
Now you have the tensions between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. You have religious tensions in the world. Everything is designed to drive parties up against each other.
I will encourage people to, I'll put that link in, watch your lecture on Hegelian dialectic again. And order out of chaos.
And see how this works out. Now, if you have so much chaos, and if you have so much civil unrest, for whatever reason, and what is amazing to me is how the powers that be allow the unrest and allow it to escalate to the point of violence, where people are losing their lives and apparently doing nothing. And then the next wave of violence comes, and the next wave of violence. And then you have the gender violence. And if you look at what's happening in the school systems in the United States, and how they are deliberately introducing a material that angers another portion of the society, and you have this clash and this hatred, and how you ostracize and name call and demonize on the media to create even more tension. Eventually you will have civil unrest on a scale which becomes unmanageable.
Yes.
But that's perhaps exactly what they want.
Yes.
Then you bring in martial law, and then no constitution has any say anymore, and you can do whatever you like.
And you can even bring back or implement the death penalty.
Yes, and it's interesting, in Europe, the death penalty has been abolished.
Yeah.
But there is new regulation which claims that if there is civil unrest or war, then the death penalty is warranted. So the death penalty actually is back again.
Exactly.
And we are in a state of emergency.
The whole world is.
And they're going to keep it there. Because then no rules and no constitution applies. So you can go to court as much as you like.
You can claim the protection of the Constitution, but it won't help you.
Meaningless. Meaningless. So the point that we are making is we are heading for a time such as never was. In fact, we are in a time such as never was. And people must start thinking. And it's not necessary to take a stand for one group or the other group in any of these divisions. We must become observers.
Yes, because the whole agenda is coming from a biblical standpoint.
Without people knowing it.
Yes.
Because they've rejected the word of God and put it aside. So Martin, now we can actually start our discussion, right?
Yes.
That was the introduction. Here's a quote. As religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation, those who would stand for freedom of conscience will be placed in unfavorable positions. For their own sake, they should, while they have opportunity, become intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. And those who do this will find a field of labor anywhere. There will be suffering ones, plenty of them, who will need help, not only amongst those of our own faith, but largely amongst those who know not the truth. So Martin, if you read this and it says, as religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation. You know, even the issue of the racial divides, Black Lives Matter, for example, is a religious issue. Yes. And they have claimed it is a religious issue. When it comes to the vaccines, they have claimed it is a religious issue.
Yes.
Right? The papacy has made it very plain. When it comes to climate change, they've made it a religious issue. All of these things have become religious issues. And it will be necessary under these circumstances to be wise when it comes to how to deal with pandemics and disease. Again and again, I have been instructed that the medical missionary work is to bear the same relation to the work of the third angel's message that the arm and the hand bear to the body. Under the direction of the divine head, they are to work unitedly in preparing the way for the coming of Christ. The right arm of the body of truth is to be constantly active, constantly at work, and God will strengthen it. But it is not to be made the body. At the same time, the body is not to say to the arm, I have no need of thee. The body has need of the arm in order to do active, aggressive work. Both have their appointed work, and each will suffer great loss if worked independently of the other. We have shown in numerous previous discussions that Babylon has a right arm, which is its medical hold that it has on society. Everybody in the world is afraid to be without medical aid or assistance. And God has a medical arm which is totally different. The medical missionary work should be a part of the work of every church in our land. Disconnected from the church, it would soon become a strange medley of disorganized atoms. In other words, you cannot separate the biblical truth. You cannot separate the plan of salvation. You cannot separate the three angels' messages, the last warning to the world, from the medical missionary work. It's not possible. No. Instead of acting as God's helping hand to forward his truth, it would sap the life and force of the church and weaken the message. Conducted independently, it would not only consume talent and means needed in other lines, but in the very work of helping the helpless, apart from the ministry of the word, it would place men where they would scoff at Bible truth. You know, I'm going to say something now, which I might regret, but I'm going to say it anyway. Many of our institutionalized arms have separated the health message from the ministry of the Bible. Yes. Some have become relief organizations without a message, and some have become a message without a relief. When you separate them, you are doing a disservice to the final message that has to go out into the world. We want to be recognized. Let's show people that we care. But let's not talk about Jesus. Right? Or we want to show that we care, but let's do it in line with the world. Yes. And let's not bring in the special way. And it can work like that on any level. You can supply meals to people and help them in their turmoil, but the meal must be like the world does it. Whereas originally that was not the idea. No. So this is taking place all over. We've had a warning not to do it. I wish to tell you that soon there will be no work done in ministerial lines but medical missionary work. We've had this one before. But just to set the tone. In other words, evangelism will soon become impossible. We're already experiencing shadow banning. Yes. And shadow banning will progress to banning.
100%.
The Pope has made that quite clear, that any form of electronic evangelism other than his own indoctrination must be removed. You will never be minister after the gospel order till you show a decided interest in medical missionary work, the gospel of healing and blessing and strengthening. Now, Martin, healing and strengthening and blessing, the healing part, isn't that part of the medical world?
Yes.
Now, here it is linked to the man who is rooted in the Bible and in the truth. He can bring healing. So this is very interesting. So this is a different kind of healing. We need to talk about this. Yeah. James 5 verse 15, and the prayer of faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up, and if he have committed sins, they shall be forgiven him. Is this an empty promise, Martin?
No, none of the Bible promises are empty.
All right. So prayer of faith will save the sick. Now, sometimes you have to answer your prayer by making some adjustments to your life,
Yes.
right? Because the Lord will not be trifled with. He will not heal you when you willingly violate the laws of health,
Yes.
right?
And also important, that phrase, your will be done. Because sometimes God knows best, and it's not exactly what you want.
Or Psalms 139 verse 14, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. Often, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. When I think back to my university career and those thick biology books and medical books that you had to study and go through, then surely you will realize that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. But I have come to the conclusion that we understand a minute fraction of what actually is happening. So let me make a statement here which some will probably dispute. Without faith in God, it is impossible to be healthy. Now, I know every atheist on the planet will shout his head off, but I'm going to make it again. Without faith in God, it is impossible to be healthy. Not in the spiritual realm, neither in the physical realm, because the mind, body, and spirit are integrally related to each other. When one suffers, they all suffer. So if you exclude the author of life out of your life, then you're basically ill.
Yes.
You are lacking something. You don't know that you're lacking something. You think you're fine. But in actual fact, you are sick, spiritually sick. And if you are spiritually sick, then at some level, because they are so connected, you're also physically sick.
Yeah.
And let's have a look at this magnificent story in the Bible about the bronze serpent that Moses had to make when they were bitten by snakes. And they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to compass the land of Edom. And the soul of the people was much discouraged because of the way. It's a tough road to Eden, right?
The narrow road is not the easy one.
Yes, Canaan is a narrow road. And the people spake against God and against Moses. Wherefore have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no bread, neither is there any water, and our soul loathes this light bread. And the Lord sent fiery serpents amongst the people, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against thee. Pray unto the Lord that he take away the serpents from us. And Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said unto Moses, Make thee a fiery serpent, and set it upon a pole, and it shall come to pass that every one that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. And Moses made a serpent of brass, and put it upon a pole. And it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. Now any logical modern day individual reading this will say this is a fairy tale, right? But this is not a fairy tale, this is a reality. And we all know that the serpent stands for Christ, who had become sin for us. So we read, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so the Son of Man was lifted up, that whosoever believeth him should not perish and have eternal life, quoting John 3:14 and 15. So if you are conscious of your sins and do not devote all your powers to mourning over them, but look and live, Jesus is our only Savior. And although millions who need to be healed will reject his offered mercy, no one who trusts in his merits will be left to perish. While we realize our helpless condition without Christ, we must not be discouraged We must rely upon a crucified and risen Savior. Poor, sin-sick, discouraged soul, look and live. Jesus has pledged his word. He will save all who come unto him. So here is the word sin, sick. So if you are sinning, then you are sick.
Yes.
And that even is manifested in the physical realm.
Definitely. I mean, if you remember the one of the man at the pool of Bethesda.
Correct. All right, so let me sum it up again, Martin. Would you say you agree with this? Guilt causes disease.
Yeah.
Depression causes disease. Fear causes disease. Anger, uncertainty, lack of trust, bitterness, all cause disease. Humanity on its own is not capable of dealing with these issues, and that is why millions have become dependent on drugs, medication, psychologists, psychiatrists, and numerous other avenues of relief which lead the soul to perdition. Now, I'm not saying by making a statement like that that a psychologist and a psychiatrist will necessarily lead you to perdition. But the fact of the matter is you go there in the first place because you cannot cope with life. And you might get relief, but the relief will be temporary. It doesn't cure the soul.
No. It's like taking medication for a headache.
Correct.
It's not going to the cause of it, it's just the symptoms that you're treating.
Correct. So any one of these issues causes disease. Here's an interesting statement from Testimonies for the Church. Imagination leads to severe forms of disease. The mind needs to be controlled, for it has a most powerful influence upon the health. The imagination often misleads, and when indulged, brings severe forms of disease upon the afflicted. Many die of diseases which are mostly imaginary. That's an incredible statement, right? I'm acquainted with several who have brought upon themselves actual disease by the influence of the imagination. That is a statement in the spirit of prophecy. Now, if we go to the medical world, let's see whether they can corroborate that. Here is an article in Health Today, the nocebo effect. If you think you'll get sick, you will. This is now the medical world speaking. Some patients will feel better after taking a medication, even if the drug doesn't actually do anything to treat their condition. It's called the placebo effect. But there's another side to the power of suggestion. Patients might develop symptoms and side effects purely because they've been told about them. Now, many are saying that the people that are falling over and dying, that is a nocebo effect.
So they're actually using it to suit them now.
They're using this to suit themselves. But, you know, if you have an inflammation of the heart and you are running onto a field to do sports, then that is not a nocebo effect. That is a consequence of something. But nevertheless, they are using it for that.
But then you've got the other side, where a lot of people might have gotten sick in these last few years
because of the constant media pressure and fear-mongering.
Yes.
So a new report analyzes the so-called nocebo effect and suggests that doctors learn how to better exploit the power of words for the benefit of patients. Patients themselves are crucial players too, said the study lead author Dr. Winfried Hauser, an associate professor of psychosomatic medicine at the Klinikum Saarbrücken in Germany. It is not only the power of the mostly unintentionally negative words of physicians and nurses, but also the power of negative expectations, negative experiences, fear of the patients, Hauser said. So, do we have a corroboration of the spirit of prophecy here?
Definitely.
It continues, and this one I found very interesting. Patients are highly receptive to negative suggestion. particularly in situations perceived as existentially threatening, such as an impending surgery, acute severe illness, or an accident, the researchers wrote. Persons in extreme situations are often in a natural trance state and thus highly suggestible. So in other words, Martin, are we talking about mass hypnosis by the media?
It's very possible. If you, once again, look at that, the art of lying. So the media uses hypnosis to put you in that trance.
To put you in that trance. So it's a kind of hypnosis. And if you look at that Austrian video, which we showed a short intro to, and the rest is on the link, then you will see how suggestible people are. They swallow a narrative, hook, line, and sinker, without looking at a contrary narrative, and become so indoctrinated that they have become devoid of human feelings.
There's also a case of a doctor that they constantly were putting forward one narrative because he was using the data from the specific manufacturer. And he didn't believe that they would lie. Eventually, it came out now with some researchers that there's definitely something going on that's not kosher. And now he's saying, I'm sorry, but I relied on this data.
Correct. Absolutely.
And that's also sometimes going into this trance because you so rely on the data that's being fed you.
Now, Martin, who is the only one that is 100% reliable?
God.
God. So he states here that this state of consciousness leaves those affected vulnerable to misunderstandings arising from literal interpretations, ambiguities, and negative suggestions. So instead of remaining in a trance and just absorbing everything, step outside the box and say, let's be logical. And let's talk about these things. There is something seriously wrong here. And the question is, why? Let's read another statement from Councils on Diets and Foods. There are many ways of practicing the healing arts, but there's only one way that heaven approves. Now, we've had this one before, but let's just put it there again for clarity's sake. God's remedies are the simple agencies of nature that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties. And then she mentions pure air, water, cleanliness, a proper diet, purity of life, firm trust in God, are remedies for the want of which thousands are dying. Yet these remedies are going out of date because their skillful use requires work that the people do not appreciate. Fresh air, exercise, pure water, and clean, sweet premises are within the reach of all, with but little expense. But drugs are expensive, both in the outlay of means and the effect produced upon the system. So pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, rest, exercise, proper diet, the use of water, trust in divine power, these are the true remedies. Now, Martin, isn't that in juxtaposition to the worldview?
No, 100% the opposite.
It's the opposite. It is essential both to understand the principles involved in the treatment of the sick and to have a practical training that will enable one rightly to use this knowledge. Now, I believe with all my heart that it's becoming more essential now to know about these things than ever before.
I agree with you.
We must not forget that Christ is the source of every right impulse. He is the only one that can implant in the heart enmity against sin, every desire for truth and purity, every conviction of our own sinfulness is an evidence that His Spirit is moving upon our hearts. A religion formed after the divine pattern is the only one that will endure. So we've had two only ones. There's only one way of dealing with disease that heaven approves of, and there's only one religion that can give you inner peace. So only by striving to live the life of Christ here can we prepare ourselves to live with Him through the eternal ages. Now, I've put this slide in because it tells a story. As in the macro, so in the micro. So if we look at the world out there, in the animal kingdom and in the ecologies of the world, you have a very intricate system. You have the producers of nutrition, which is the plant world. And some of that plant world is unicellular and occurs in oceans, but it forms the basis through photosynthesis. Then you have the primary feeders that feed on the plant material, and then you'll have the first level and second level and third level of carnivores. And then you'll have a lot of debris that remains. Then you'll have the scavengers that clean it up. Any dead material will be scavenged by creatures that live on the bottom, like crabs and lobsters and mollusks and snails. They are the cleanup units. So they're cleaning up the debris. And then you have the bacteria. And sometimes there will be toxins in the environment, and then you'll have blooms. And you'll have surfactants, and you'll have foams, and you'll have a cleansing of the environment. So as it is in the macro world, so it is in the micro world. So your body is not just what I see. No. Within you are thousands of different cells doing different things. Some are providing energy, some are assimilating, some are muscle cells, some are nerve cells, etc. Thousands of different cells. But then you have a lot of symbiotants in you, a lot of bacteria that aid in your digestion. Some of them are scavengers. And your immune system is like these scavengers that gobble up anything that shouldn't be there. And then you have materials that are being produced that bind things together so that the macrophages can come and gobble it up and remove it out of your system eventually. So you have a cleanup operation. And sometimes it becomes so bad that you have to use certain mechanisms to bind the toxins before they kill you. So as it is in the macro world, when you study how nature operates and what the interactions are, so it is in the micro world. So let's have a look at some of these issues, and I think now it will start getting a little bit interesting, and also a little bit of controversy will be introduced. In 3 John 1 verse 2 we read, "Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth." My question is it God's will that we should prosper and be healthy?
Yes.
Okay.
He says it.
He says so, right? So can we also ask a counter question? God, if you are so concerned about our health, why did you create so many booby traps out there to make us sick? Is that a good question?
It's a fair question.
It's a fair question to ask to God, right? All right, if you want us to be healthy, why did you produce so many toxic agents and so many pathogens that can kill us and make us sick? If you want us to prosper and be healthy, are you some kind of vindictive deity, or what is your game plan here? Or Martin, is it perhaps that we misunderstand everything?
I think the latter is more in line with if I read the Bible.
All right, now if you start talking about these issues, what will the mainline media say?
No,
Fact check, right? And then have their fact checkers, and the fact checkers come straight out of the pits of hell. So, theory of disease. Are we dealing with a case of classical reversal, is a question. Remember, I've always said that the devil is the master of reversal.
Yes.
Everything is not as it seems, and nothing as it seems is like it is. There are two theories regarding disease, and this is very important. The one theory says that disease comes from the outside, and the other theory says disease comes from the inside. So they are actually opposites, right? Germ theory. Now, Louis Pasteur is considered the father of germ theory. He argues that the enemy, germs and viruses, attack from without and need to be conquered. And the way in which you conquer them is through allopathic medicine. So the enemy lives outside of you, and he's constantly attacking you. And the response of the medical world is to create weapons against the enemy and blast it to smithereens. So if it is a bacterium, you will kill it with an antibiotic. If it is a virus, you will use an antiviral. And whatever it takes, if it is a headache, you will suppress it. Whatever happens to you is an enemy and needs to be violently countered and silenced. That is what we call allopathic response. Here's the alternative, or disease is a response of violating the laws of health, or a response to the introduction of toxins into the body, and must be remedied by introducing a proper lifestyle and by assisting the body to rid itself of the offending substances and restoring homeostasis. That's an alternative theory. Now, these two are in collision. And which one of these two, Martin, would you consider more in line with 3 John 1 verse 2?
The second one.
The second one, right? God says, I want you to prosper and I want you to be in good health. But there are certain things that you have to take care of. Yes. Avoid environmental toxins. Avoid putting something into your body that is detrimental to you. And let me help you with that. Let me give you a couple of guidelines. Would that be a God that is not as miserable as the one that we previously proposed?
That throws all these detrimental things at you.
All right. Now, here's an article from the Grand Lodge of Ohio. It's a Freemason webpage. And it tells us that Dr. Jenner was performing his vaccination. And it also tells us what his affiliations were. Worshipful Master Edward Jenner. Now, in a previous one, we said there are many that claim he was a Jesuit too.
Yes.
Now, we haven't found definite evidence to that cause, but here is definite evidence that he was a Freemason. So he was raised a Master Mason in 1802 and was a member of the Lodge of Faith and Friendship 270 in Gloucestershire, England, and he was active in the fraternity, serving in 1812 as master of his lodge. So here was a man who helped introduce the modern way of dealing with disease. And he was a Freemason of the highest orders.
Aye.
Now, here is Louis Pasteur, and here's another man by the name of Antoine de Champ, I think, or Camp, however you pronounce his name. And the question here is an article by Dr. Robert Young. He asked the question, who had their finger on the magic of life? Was it Antoine de Camp or Louis Pasteur? Louis Pasteur was a French chemist and microbiologist born in Dole is best known for his so-called remarkable breakthroughs in the causes and prevention of disease. His experiments supported the germ theory of disease. In other words, the enemy lives outside of you, and we have to constantly devise weapons to keep him under control. In essence, Pasteur taught that disease came from outside the body in the form of bacteria. For Pasteur, to fight illness is to treat the symptoms with a vaccination. This approach has shaped modern medicine and pharmacology. And he's the father of germ theory. Becamp taught that disease was born from inside the body fluids and then inside the body cells. For Becamp, you do not fight illness. You create a healthy alkaline internal fluid environment in which disease symptoms cannot develop by the breakdown of healthy blood and the blood cells into bacteria, yeast and mold and their associated chemical acid waste. Now, this is a very interesting theory that he had. These two gentlemen were both professors and well-respected scientists, and they were constantly at loggerheads with each other because they had opposite views. Now, Becamp believed that the cells in your body actually break down and form other cells and other organisms even within your body. Now, we're not here to debate how far that is true or it is not true, but basically he is saying that even the tiniest particles in your body derive from existent cells. So your cells are basically polymorphic. They can become many other things. And in a sense, science has proved that that is correct, because you have stem cells in your body, and a stem cell is an undifferentiated cell, and a stem cell can become a brain cell, and it can become a muscle cell, an epithelial cell, a liver cell, a gut cell, a whatever cell. Any of the thousands of kinds of cells within your body come from one stem cell. Now, if you look at a nerve cell, anatomically it looks totally different to a muscle cell. And you would think that the two cannot possibly be related, right? Yeah. But they come from the same stem cell. Now, it is true that if you have, for example, the production of blood platelets, that you have cells which eventually break up, produce them, and then break up into all these blood platelets, which help in the clotting process. So they come from a cell. And if you looked at this platelet by itself, you wouldn't imagine that it came from another cell. Eventually you take it all the way down to viruses. And there are different layers, and for example, he would argue that the cells in the blood break down and form whatever they have to do. So a macrophage, for example, will gobble up any debris in your body and detoxify your body by consuming it. But if the elements become too toxic, the cell will actually break down into protein and RNA and DNA portions, which they didn't know about in those days yet, because it hadn't been discovered yet. And today you would call some of these strange names that he called these things viruses. Yeah. So the question is a virus something that comes from outside and attacks you? That's germ theory. Or is a virus something that is produced in response to toxic environments as a cleanup agent, like a surfactant, like a soap, to bind things and then to be eradicated together with your immune cells and to be thrown out of the body? So does it come from inside, from violating the laws of health, or consuming something that is detrimental to your body, whether on purpose or by accident? Or is it something that is living out there or almost living out there and attacks you? Those are two different theories. is an article by a man called Jeff Green. Now, we're not going to discuss the merit necessarily. We're just going to say this is what the argument is out there in the world. And he asks the question, are there alternative views? In other words, is there another way of looking at viruses and disease? And he writes in this article, Viral Misconceptions, the idea that viruses are invading agents that cause disease was created by Louis Pasteur in the 1800s. His theory, known as the germ theory of disease, is the catalyst for all theories existing in the medical profession. At the same time that Louis Pasteur was developing his germ theory, there was another French scientist by the name of Antoine Béchamp, and he came up with his own theory of disease and documented and proved it in his book, The Third Element of Blood. His theory was radically different. It was called the terrain theory. Now, the terrain theory proposes that all living microorganisms and viruses originate within the body, not from without. Viruses occur in the body as a result of systemic toxicity, not because the body has been invaded by an external threat. Without the false germ theory to rely upon, and the contagious myth that is so brainwashed into people, the medical profession would have nothing to stand on and would topple like a house of cards. Now, I'm not going to debate here, and we are not going to debate how far you can take this theory and whether this is absolutely so. The fact of the matter is, viruses have never been isolated from outside. But if you take a sample, then there are RNA and protein conglomerates, which we call viruses, in a person that has a disease situation.
Yeah.
So the question is, did that element come from outside, or is it something that the body itself produced? Mm-hmm. So whether the one is absolutely right or the other is actually now not up for debate, but the question is, if it is so, that the virus is a final response to a toxicity, so that your normal immune function, like your macrophages, etc., and your symbiotics couldn't absorb it, that it is like a cleansing material to help the body get rid of it. In other words, it is the final alarm bell. Something is seriously wrong. If that is the case, Martin, then the body is trying to rid itself of something. And the logical response, if that is so, is to help the body to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. If your theory is that it comes from outside, then the logical response is suppress it.
Exactly. Stop it from getting
Stop it. And that is the approach that the world uses. Now, if that is the approach, and the disease is actually a means of trying to get rid of it, that means that the disease is not only an alarm bell, but also your mechanism of getting rid of it. So, two approaches. Mm-hmm. You fight the disease is the one approach. You suppress the disease. The other approach, you help the disease. Mm-hmm. Can you see that there are two philosophies at work here?
Yes.
Now, we're not going to be dogmatic and say we agree with the one or the other absolutely, because there's probably overlap somewhere, but it's just interesting that there are these two theories.
It's interesting for me. We were staying for a while with one of our health resorts, and there it's also basically trying to help your body to get rid of whatever is causing anything. And even cancer is on a similar basis.
Correct.
Cancer is actually something that's trying to get your body cleaning, ridding your body of something.
All right. Now, if you have this philosophy in your mind that disease is a response of the body to something that is causing the disease within you, and that you must help your body, that will determine your philosophy. as to how to deal with disease, right? So the modern world tells you that the solution is you have to be immunized against all of these enemies out there that have been placed into this hostile world to make your life a misery. That somehow also affects your view of God, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So now here's a very interesting article that appeared in this very prominent German magazine. And it says the act of inoculation is an act of love towards your neighbor. Now, that's something that the Pope said, right? So they've basically rephrased it here in this picture. This picture speaks 1,000 words. It has a religious connotation. You have the angels looking from above. You have baby Jesus. And you have the wise men bringing their gifts, and one of the gifts is an inoculum. So that would be a modern version. Yeah. If you buy that narrative, right? If you are of that narrative. Now, the Pope said that to become vaccinated is an act of love towards your neighbor. And then they had this interesting little cartoon where Lucy is talking. And the little boy says, the Pope has said that to be vaccinated, to have yourself vaccinated is an act of love. And Lucy answers, that may be. But any act of love that is forced upon you is called rape. That's interesting, right? It's true. It's very true. This is very, very close to what the reality of the situation is in the world that we are living in. Yeah. All right, so if disease is something that comes from within, then your lifestyle is very important. Your diet, whether you consume animal products, dairy, for example, any one of those. As soon as you go into animal products, you are on a higher trophic level, and you are absorbing accumulated toxins. So any animal product will have more toxins than the base, which is the plant. That's just how ecology works. Exercise becomes important. Clean and unclean animals become very important. Why did God give such meticulous instructions with regard to this?
Interesting that those instructions were even before the flood, because otherwise how would Noah have known which is unclean and clean? Correct.
And it's interesting that those that are unclean are all of those that either use cecal fermentation or they are carnivores or scavengers. They're all unclean. They're the cleanup agents. So don't consume them, because you are then consuming the toxins that they were supposed to remove from the environment, right?
It comes back to what you said earlier.
As in the macro.
So in the micro.
So in the micro.
It's logical.
Yes, it's logical. Fresh air. You don't want to inhale substances. Now, Martin, there's a lot of talk about chemicals in the world that you shouldn't be inhaling. Well, if you just go to a city that's polluted, you're inhaling a lot of material that your body certainly doesn't want. Yeah. Now, it's very interesting that your body goes on a rhythmic cyclic cleansing operation on a regular basis, on a circadian rhythm, or even shorter rhythms than an annual rhythm. And that is what you find in the world. The flu season. It's a rhythm.
Yes.
It's an annual rhythm. That's why they can precisely tell you when the next wave is coming, because they know what the rhythms are. The graphs are readily available. Now, that is an annual attempt of the body, or a monthly attempt of the body, to get rid of toxins. So the body dumps these toxins and the system cleans them up. And sometimes the toxic load is so much that you have to start using cleansing agents. And in this case, the one theory says that's viruses actually produced by your own body in its own genetic system as a cleanup agent and expels it out of the body. And how do you deal with that? Besides just general pollution, there are many that claim that there are deliberate toxifications in the form of chemtrails. We're not going to go into that. But knowing the human psyche, nothing is impossible, right?
And if you put it into biblical perspective, nothing is impossible.
Correct. Then sunlight. We all know that we need sunlight. Your immune system needs it for vitamin D production. Water. You don't want to drink water that has toxins in it or heavy metals in it, because then your body will have to fight it and get rid of it. And you need trust in God. So it's a package deal, right? Here's another quote. If you are trying to find an easy way to go through this world, that you shall not suffer any cross, any temptation, any loss, just think of Jesus. He left the glory that he had with the Father before the world was and came to our world to walk amongst the children of men. He was the only one that could save us. There's your trust in God, right? Now, what did he purchase? He purchased our intellect. That means nobody has the right to coerce your intellect.
Yes, if your conscience tells you no, then nobody has the right to let you change your conscience.
Correct. He purchased our souls. We don't belong to anyone here to be at their mercy, right? He purchased every power, every ability that God has given to man, that we should use that ability to the glory of the Master that has bought us, that we might engage in his work with all the powers of our being. He stands first. I stand less, in a subordinate position. Self cannot be regarded as supreme. So we have one Master, and we take our marching orders from him. Thou art the chief physician, not only of the soul, but of the body as well. Thou art the only one that can apply the balm of Gilead. We encouraged her as best we could and left her feeling quite happy. So they're talking to a particular one. And if you do not bring faith into this equation, then you will have a very large proportion lacking.
Yes.
Now, let's look at some of these theories. The body actually consists of oceans of water. Now, the word ocean is a plural in itself, but in this case, the plural is oceans, because we're talking about more than one.
Yeah.
There is intracellular water, so within cells you have water. And then in the blood you have an ocean, which is called the plasma. And then you have interstitial. This is this blue portion over here. This is actually the largest organ in the body, the interstitial fluid. And the interstitial fluid actually then later becomes part of the lymphatic system. So here is your lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system consists of all of these lymphatic vessels, and they come together, and eventually here into the subclavian vein, they drain back into the blood and become part of the blood. But you have all of these lymph nodes that aid in your immunology. So if you have a toxic load, if you have a toxin, you will find that your lymph nodes start swelling up. They have a work to do. They are cleansing agents. So this cell over here produces metabolic waste. And in some cases, if the body is toxic, the cells become toxic. And that material ends up then here in this blue portion, the interstitial fluid. And that eventually passes through the lymphatic system, and there your immune system takes care of anything that is really serious. Mm-hmm. And if your lymph glands start swelling, it tells you your body has a toxic load. You better go on a detox, right? So it's warning you there's something in your body that you should be taking care of. So the lymphatic system is a very important system, and it's about 3 liters of fluid that pass back into your blood every single day. And as the blood pumps, the pressure builds up and some of the fluid leaks out and becomes part of the interstitial fluid. That again feeds the cells, etc., etc. It's a cycle. And as in the macro, so in the micro. So in the blood, which is not shown over here, you have cells which gobble up debris and anything that is detrimental to your body. So Martin, it is essential that if you want to be healthy, you need to have good blood.
Definitely.
Right?
The life is in the blood.
Correct. So let's just look at what it means to have good blood. God has written his law upon every nerve and muscle, every fiber and function of the human body. The indulgence of unnatural appetite, whether for tea, coffee, tobacco, or liquor, is intemperance and is at war with the laws of life and health. By using these forbidden articles, a condition of things is created in the system which the Creator never designed. This indulgence in any of the numbers of human family is sin. The eating of food that does not make good blood is working against the laws of our physical organism and is a violation of the law of God. The cause produces the effect. Suffering, disease, and death are the sure penalty of indulgence. According to this statement, where does disease come from?
Inside.
According to your habits, right? All right, here's an interesting article, and it comes from the Science Daily. Some blood cells have a surprising source: your gut. Now, Martin, this article comes from November 29, 2018, and it was a study conducted by the Columbia University Irvine Medical, and how they discovered this is amazing. Because it was always thought that blood is just produced in the marrow and in the spleen, but not in the gut. Nobody knew that. But in some cases where people become ill and have diseases of the gut, like Crohn's disease, for example, and it becomes necessary to cut out a portion of the gut, they have used transplants to transplant some other person's intestine back into that individual. And then they discovered that blood cells were being produced which were of a different blood type than the one that the person that received it had. And they discovered that the intestine produces blood. So the human intestine may provide up to 10% of blood cells in circulation from its own reservoir of blood-forming stem cells. A surprising new study has found. Scientists had previously thought that blood cells are created exclusively in the bone marrow from a special population of hematopoietic stem cells. In actual fact, there are scientists that believe that the blood that you circulate constantly is mainly produced in the gut, and the rest is basically an emergency storage area and secondary production area. So the gut plays a very important part, and this has only been known since 2018. So it's just over 2.5 years old, this discovery. Here's another one, Science Daily, epigenetic mechanism of blood cell differentiation. This comes from 2020, the Max Planck Institute of Immunobiology and Epigenetics summary. In the bone marrow, blood stem cells via precursor cells give rise to a variety of blood cell types with various functions. White blood cells, red blood cells, or blood platelets. So here you have this idea that one cell produces many different kinds of cells, right? This is basically what Beckamp said. In which cell types a cell develops depends on various factors. The correct dosage of the enzyme MOF at the right time triggers developmental programs in blood stem cells and precursor cells, and the cells differentiate into red blood cells. On average, the human body contains 35 trillion red blood cells. Approximately 3 million of these small disc-shaped cells die in 1 second. That's a lot, right?
Yeah.
But in this second, the same number is also produced to maintain the level of active red blood cells. Interestingly, all of these cells undergo a multi-level differentiation process called erythropoiesis. They start from hematopoietic stem cells, the precursor to every blood cell, including all types of immune cells, and differentiate then firstly into multipotent progenitor cells, followed by a gradual process of specialization into mature red blood cells. So you have this cascade. Now, Martin, what if we were to go a little bit further and say that if this whole system cannot cope, it will break down further into cleansing agents such as viruses, etc. And they are a consequence of a toxic load that the normal system cannot cope with. That would mean you have to help the disease and not fight the disease. So if we look at blood, here we have a slide of what healthy blood looks like. And you can see all these little red blood corpuscles, pretty separate one from another. Now, why is it that they do not agglutinate, stick together? Well, all of these have protein coverage, but they also have a charge.
Oh, yeah.
So a red blood cell generally has a negative charge. So when they come up against each other, they repel each other. So that way they stay nice and separate. If something interferes with the protein coating, then that charge can be interfered with. And you can start getting what we call clumping, which you have over here. You see? And here are the web pages where you can look this up if you wanted to. But basically, this is not a healthy blood. You don't want your blood to look like that. You want your blood to look like that. Now, why would you want that? Well, on this slide, you can see a capillary. A capillary is the smallest little blood vessel, right? And you can see that the red blood cells pass through this capillary in single file. It is so small that only one blood cell can go through at a time. In fact, the red blood cell is slightly larger than the capillary, so that the capillary has to stretch, which is very useful when you look at your lungs, and you have the capillaries around the alveoli. As it expands, it's very close to the surface. The surface becomes thinner because it expands, and there's an easy oxygen exchange and carbon dioxide exchange and anything else that the body wants to get rid of in the lungs. You can imagine, Martin, that if your blood looks like this, clumping, then that would have a very hard time going through there.
Yeah.
Right? And that would mean that that would cut down the oxygen supply considerably. There's another aspect of blood which is called coin roll. And here is an article from Live Blood Online. Red blood cells overlapping tightly in a curved coin roll appearance. Like here you can see. Now they form little sausages. Now Martin, if this is one red blood cell and this is another one, and you stick them together, then you've halved the surface area.
Yeah.
Because now that is available and that is available, but that's on the inside. So if you have these little sausages going through the capillaries, then you are only experience a very limited surface area as to when they go through individually. So that would cut your oxygen supply, right?
Yeah.
And your oxygen uptake. Now, what causes that? It's interesting that this medical journal here says indicative of digestive imbalance and intestinal stress due to enzyme deficiencies or inappropriate diet. Didn't we just read that?
Yes.
That your diet determines whether you make good blood or bad blood?
Yeah.
So what are the reasons why you can get blood that looks like that? Digestive imbalance, intestinal stress. This is the worst stage of protein linkage and indicates hyperviscosity, thick blood. It correlates with excess protein in the blood due to poor protein digestion and assimilation. Other causes may include, now listen to this, this comes from the medical journals. We just read it in the Spirit of Prophecy.
Yeah.
Stress, coffee, cigarettes, carbonated, caffeinated drinks, excess meat, and refined sugar. So, good diet, good blood.
That's it.
Bad diet, bad blood. Now, Martin, if you can introduce proteins, let's become specific, and let's say spike protein. If you can introduce that into the blood and make it adhere to the red blood corpuscles, I've seen many, many pictures by pathologists who had looked at the blood as it looks with COVID or with vaccinated people, and much of it starts looking like this.
Yes.
This is not good blood. And this is a blood that cuts your oxygen supply. No wonder that you are short breath. So you supply the oxygen, but if the blood doesn't go single file through those corpuscles, it won't really help. You really want to correct this. You want to help your body to get rid of whatever is causing this problem.
Yeah.
Right? So, do you suppress? Do you add more of the problem in the form of whatever you're injecting? Or what do you do? So, let's ask a question. Did God give counsel on how to maintain health? The answer is yes, He did. In the book of Genesis, He outlined the original diet of man. In the book of Leviticus, He places certain restrictions on the diet of man, and He tells you what is unclean and what is clean. But originally, the diet tells you cut meat out entirely. In the Exodus account, we read His dealings with Israel and the food He provided. They craved the flesh food, and God provided something else, right?
Yes.
In the Spirit of Prophecy, there are instructions on how to maintain a healthy body in terms of mind, body, and spirit. And God promised relief from disease of the Egyptians on condition of obedience to His instructions. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
So, Martin, if disease is something that originates, according to the germ theory, outside and must be fought, then it doesn't matter what lifestyle you have. You can eat, drink, and be merry, and just get your weapons in order to fight whatever's coming your way. We have two philosophies here. So the Lord promised that He would put none of the diseases of the Egyptians upon them if they would follow His ways.
Yeah.
So in Exodus 15:26, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in His sight, and will give ear to His commandments, and keep all His statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. And Deuteronomy 7:15, and the Lord will take away from thee all sickness, and will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt, which thou knowest, upon thee, but will lay them upon all of them that hate thee. Here are two statements. Intemperance has well nigh filled the world with disease, and the ministers of the gospel cannot spend their time and strength in relieving all in need of help. The Lord has ordained that Christians, physicians, and nurses shall labor in connection with those who preach the word. You cannot separate the two. And we must teach our children that we must not violate the laws of our being.
And also, like the title of this whole discussion is medical missionary work in a time of crisis.
Correct.
So the right medical missionary work.
And here's an interesting one from the Review and Herald. Nature, to relieve herself of poisonous impurities, makes an effort to free the system. This effort produces fevers and what is termed disease. But even then, if those who are afflicted would assist nature in her efforts by the use of pure, soft water, much suffering would be prevented. But many, instead of doing this and seeking to remove the poisonous matter from the system, take a more deadly poison into the system to remove a poison already there. This is the crux of the matter. Now, my question to you, what we just read, is it in harmony with the theory that disease is the enemy without? Or is it in harmony with disease is your friend trying to rid your body of what is detrimental to it?
Whatever toxin is in your body, that's the one.
And if that is the one, then this statement must be true. The only hope of better things is in the education of the people in right principles. Let physicians teach the people that restorative power is not in drugs, but in nature. Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health. Martin, this is the crux of the matter. We have two ideologies, and the truth is quite probably reversed.
And it's not surprising if you take who is trying to reverse it.
Yes.
The master of reversals is behind all of this.
And some of these toxins are deliberately introduced into the environment by some people who have lost all connection with the true God. That is why Martin can write that the devil, through his agents, imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish of the pestilence. These visitations are to become more and more frequent and disastrous. Destruction will be upon both man and beast. So did God create these enemies without, or is man responsible here?
And is it by chance, or is this deliberate?
Do you want to pull it through all the way to climate change? So Martin, let's end with this verse from Proverbs. My son, attend to my words. Incline thy ears unto my sayings. Let them not depart from thine eyes. Keep them in the midst of thine heart, for they are life unto those that find them, and health to all their flesh. May God give us wisdom to discern the true nature of disease. And in the next one, we will discuss how to deal with the disease once it has manifested itself.
Most important for our time.
And this is what is, as you say, essential for our time. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, is it possible that we are so ignorant that we have been led down a garden path in many, many aspects? I know, Lord, that the issue is not always black or white, and that there are shades of gray. But if disease is a response to something that has happened inside of us because of what we do or partake in, then there must be a solution that is in harmony with your principles. Help us to find it, to live it, and to preach it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.